This is Bitnar Talks, the engineer takes on construction. Episode 38. Hi, I'm Piotr Bitnar. Each day I help my clients plan and design building projects through Bitnar Limited, a consulting chartered structural engineer's practice. My biggest passion and the cornerstone on which I've built my business is finding clever solutions for construction projects. I am a chartered structural engineer and a budding software developer, so you can rest assured that I will strive to talk about the best practices and the use of new technologies in the industry. And if you're embarking on a construction project or are involved in planning, designing and building the world around us, you'll find this podcast useful. Approved document Z, Whole Life Carbon. Hi guys, and welcome to Bitnar Talks, your favorite podcast on all matters of architecture, engineering and construction. It is Thursday the 5th of December 2024, and I'm here back with you with the 38th episode and information on approved document Z, Whole Life Carbon. Who does not love the period towards Christmas break? We are all working on the full throttle, delivering designs and solutions to sites all over the place, just so everything is nicely tied up before the curtain falls and most of us go for a well-deserved break. I'm planning to close the year with 40 episodes of this podcast and restart recording the second week of January. So let's start with the delivery of this one, but before I move forward to the new material, let's recap the past episode. In the last episode, I talked about the approved document 7 materials and workmanship that are covered in two sections. Section 1 deals with materials, where building regulation tells us we need to use materials that are fit for purpose. No brainer there, really, is there? We are flexible on the use of the material, though, as long as we meet performance and functional requirements. Compliance can be demonstrated through the use of CE marking, British standards, international standards with proper justification of their appropriability, if there is such a word, to the British market, independent certifications, or historical performance evidence of the material in use. Authorities may inspect materials under Regulation 46 or impose conditions to ensure safety for the use of more perishable materials that need to be accessible for the maintenance and replacement and repair whenever needed. Some further restrictions are applicable to combustible materials in tall residential buildings, but we well know about this one. We're talking buildings over 11 meters and obviously 18 meters. Section 2 workmanship deals with, guess what? Well, workmanship, right? Which basically needs to be good and proper. Standard to ensure safety and functionality can be fulfilled by following the guidance of CE marking standards or following British standard 8000 series. Independent or proprietary certification schemes are also a very good starting point. Quality can be further verified through robust management systems, past performance and regulatory tests like sound insulation testing, ventilation or pressure testing. The British Standard 8000 series outline detailed workmanship standards across various construction tasks, covering things like principles and specifications of like masonry, roofing, glazing, drainage, and so on. In this episode, I will move to the possible future approved document, the approved document Z, Whole Life Carbon. So without further ado, let's dive straight into this. So the world is changing different. We reached the apex of growth and now we look into making things better for us all. You know, most of us can buy a car, a home, or at least rent one, right? Or have an avocado and egg sarnie. Once you get to this level of development, it does not really make sense to just keep on going the old ways. And when you have a global information exchange and most know about things having a global impact, a global discussion follows straight after about things of the daily occurrences, and things like big disasters are very quickly spread throughout the land. Now, on the topic of global warming, or perhaps cutting ourselves away from the dictatorship world or OPEC hydrocarbon dependencies, and whether building more when there is enough is a good idea, you will find many opinions, and the proposed approved document Z is such an opinion with a difference. It actually drives a solution. Whether the solution is good or bad, there is still time to see, but for certain, if we do not measure what we do, we will have no clue where we are heading. Several European countries do it already, but hey, European Union likes to formalize everything, don't they? But on this front, I trust they are right. The information on the proposed document, as well as the actual document proposal, can be found on part-z.uk website. You can head to this space to endorse the initiative. I have already. Frankly, without this legislation, we will maintain the status quo of wasters and inconsiderate monkeys, just because we can. As long as the investments will pay with dividends, we will continue to build wastefully. In my over 10-year career in the construction industry, I have learned that finance and legislation are the only forces that matter, and we can certainly influence legislation to make that change. Alright, so let's have a look into the nitty-gritty of this proposal. So what is the fuss all about? It's about not so clever use of materials. According to information provided by the Institution of Structural Engineers, 10% of the UK's total greenhouse gas emissions is due to the creation and use of construction materials, giving an impressive 64 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year, which is quite a substantial number, nearly on par with agriculture and electricity supply, according to government data from 2023. The rate of reduction of emissions is also lagging behind the electricity and the industrial sectors, so the idea is to drive that downward with a positive trend, even further than we are doing right now, and doing so through the legislation. The proposal is rather short and sweet, as it should be, and I'm reviewing its proposal, revision number 2 of 31st of January of this year, the godly year 2024. The proposal proposes, blah blah blah, dealing with the matter in 2 requirements. Requirement Z1, treated on carbon assessment, and requirement Z2, dealing with carbon intensity. The idea is to give meaning to the whole life carbon requirements for projects with a gross internal area of 1,000 square meters or more, or such that create more than 10 dwellings. It is being proposed to contain it within 3 sections. Section 1 is to set out the relevant legislation and shows us steps to demonstrate compliance. In Section 2, we are informed of the consideration to apply to the whole life carbon assessment using the lifecycle module nomenclature of BSEN 15978, Sustainability of Construction Works Assessment of Environmental Performance of Buildings Calculation Method. The modules are A1 to A5, B1 to B7, C1 to C4, and D. I will finish this episode by expanding slightly on each and every single one of them. It is envisaged that requirement Z1 will kick in from the 1st of January 2026 and the requirement Z2 2 years later. The actual writing of the requirement does seem to be a little too little. I would rather like to see an implementation of minimum digital information for all buildings applied at certain intervals, say 5 years, no matter the size and type of building. In addition, and perhaps a provision of showing an alternative of minimized embodied carbon version of that building, as this will help us track the actual feasibility of construction. Anyhow, I will read you the proposal so you make your own judgment. The proposal as laid down to be put into the legislation, the requirement Z1, carbon assessment, whole life carbon emissions shall be assessed and reported for the building and any other part of the project where building regulations apply, and requirement Z2, carbon intensity, reasonable provision shall be made for the minimization of carbon emissions. The intention behind the document is to level the playing field when it comes to the assessment of the buildings by using the same standards in evaluation and reporting, to drive the change by decreasing the upfront embodied carbon intensity of the building to reasonably achievable levels. In section 1, we are asked to fill in the form with the whole life carbon data as defined in BSEN 15978. So A's, B's, C's and D's information, we are told that A's should not exceed the set limit. Section 2 treats on the whole life carbon assessment. We are given a handy table to fill in and we are sent to the RICS professional standards for the whole life carbon assessment for the built environment, 2nd edition, for how information with a slightly tweak to the method described in the module B6, where the energy usage should be evaluated to approved document L. We are reminded that sequestration should not form part of the upfront carbon calculation. The builder is made responsible for reporting on as-designed and as-built whole-life carbon using standard factors for the upfront determination and actual environment product declaration for the as-built report, which should be submitted digitally to a governmental portal. Section 3 sets limits for the upfront embodied carbon emissions, that is, modules A's. The assessment should be made against the nationally set performance levels. These levels are not yet set and will require data from the industry for the initial assessment. The period for the gathering of initial data is envisaged to be 2 years and then revisited every 3 years to allow improvement, but to control the level to a reasonable level for most of the industry while stopping the worst offenders in their tracks. The idea is to extend the limits across most modules with time, but starting with the A's will do for now. Okay, what are the modules about then, according to RICS? RICS cleverly made several distinctions and created nomenclature of its own. I will go with it bit by bit, breaking the whole thing down. We start with whole life carbon assessment information, which simply means all information. That grouping is then divided into whole life carbon, aka system boundary, and separately information beyond the construction works life cycle, aka benefits and loads beyond the system boundary, aka life cycle D. There are 4 life cycles, A, B, C and D. Within all of them, the biogenic carbon, the stuff sequestered within the material, is reported on separately. The life cycle D is divided further into module D1, which covers net output flows from reusing the physical elements in any way, shape or form possible, and module D2 covers resources generation of that building throughout its use. Now, the whole life carbon assessment information consists of the whole life carbon assessment and the lifecycle D, treated on separately. In other words, the actual stuff that is used by the creation, operation, and decommissioning of a building, and the stuff that can be reused, and the good stuff building produced. Now, the whole life carbon section makes a distinction between the embodied carbon, operational carbon, and user carbon. Breaking down the embodied carbon, aka life cycle embodied carbon, it is covered by life cycle A, aka upfront carbon, B, aka in-use carbon, and C, aka end-of-life carbon. Life cycle A further divides into pre-construction stage A0, covering preliminaries and design, product stage A1 to A3, so raw materials supply, transport and manufacturing, in-use stage B1 to B5, so use of the building, maintenance, repair, replacement, refurbishment, stage C1 to C4, so deconstruction and demolition, transport, waste processing and disposal. Operational carbon, as treated separately from the embodied carbon, is contained in modules B6 and B7, so operational energy and operational water, and treated separately, with user carbon, which is covered in module B8, meaning activities not covered in modules B1 to B7. You know, things like commuting, service vehicles, and all other ancillary stuff associated with the building use. So this is it, folks. The potentials of approved document Z, whole life carbon. Let's sum it up. So, the proposal addresses the significant contribution of construction materials to the UK's greenhouse gas emissions, aiming to drive reductions through standardized approach and legislation. It introduces requirement Z1 that mandates whole life carbon assessments for buildings over 1,000 meters square or developments with more than 10 dwellings, hopefully starting January 2026, and requirement Z2 focusing on minimizing carbon intensity, hopefully effective from 2028. The standard leverage the BSEN 15978 framework requiring life cycle carbon data, module A1 to A5, B1 to B7, C1 to C4, and D1 and 2, and emphasizing upfront embodied carbon limits in early phases, the modules A. Builders must report both designed and actual carbon data digitally. The framework used is the RICS professional standard, which guides the assessment, separated embodying carbon, operational and user-related carbon impacts. Modules are grouped by life cycle. Life cycle A, upfront embodied carbon, covers production and construction. B, in-use carbon, includes operation and maintenance. C, end-of-life carbon, addresses demolition and disposal. And D, evaluates reuse and resource generation benefits. Operational energy and water are treated as separate entities in module B6 and B7, with user activities impacts in module B8. Initial performance levels will be set after 2 years of data collection, with reviews every 3 years thereafter to refine benchmarks. This standardized, iterative approach aims to curb the worst practices while enabling industry-wide progress towards sustainability. So undoubtedly, we need to visit RICS whole life carbon assessment for the built environment published standard to get a little bit more acquainted with it. And also have a look into the building environment carbon database too, which is available for free online. I will leave you with a perhaps different frame of mind than the one you had before. As some will say, the grid becomes greener, and greener so the operational carbon becomes. And less important, so will the production of materials become less carbon heavy? But if that is the case, should we not still push for better buildings? Sure, we should. Just because something is more environmentally neutral does not mean we should abuse its use. In the next episode, I will talk about the Building Safety Act. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Making sure the buildings are considered wholesomely and adding some limits to the use of materials makes sense, does it not? In a future episode, I will go through the carbon assessment of the building so you have a better appreciation of this also. If you have any questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn or send me an email. I'm more than happy to help you out. In Bytna, we deal with planning, designing and managing of your projects, and we are always glad to facilitate a free initial consultation to steer you in the right direction. Visit www.bytna.co.uk and reach out to us. Whether your question is if we can help you with your project or what should I do, we will be able to give you a piece of no obligatory advice. At Bytna, we help our clients design and execute their dream homes or investments. If your building is falling apart, we can also help investigate the reasons behind it and to provide you with an appropriate strategy, design and specifications for the repair. Thank you again for listening. Please voice up your opinions. I'm waiting for you on LinkedIn and I want to hear from you. See you next week. Bytna designs the world around you. Toodaloo.